Welcome back to Live from Paris. I'm Mark Owen. These are the headlines. France on May Day, at least one officer injured badly in clashes between police and protesters. Over 300 arrests have been made as far-left black bloc militants are blamed for the violence. Opposition supporters clashed with armed forces in Caracas. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State is urging Russia to cease its support of Nicolas Maduro. Pompeo telling Lavrov Moscow is destabilizing Venezuela. And in the Champions League, Lionel Messi strikes twice to fire Barcelona to a 3-0 Champions League semi-final first leg win over Liverpool. The other goal coming from a former Liverpool player, Luis Suarez. Analysis to come. Thank you very much for being with us. There have been angry scenes once again on the streets of Paris. And according to the French Interior Minister, an attempt to enter the intensive care unit of a Paris hospital by some of the protesters. Christophe Castaner tweeted his disgust at this attempt. It followed police and protesters clashing on the May Day march. A riot police officer was badly hurt when he was struck in the head with a paving stone. And then there was the attempt to enter the ICU, which came as the Interior Minister was visiting the officer in question, who is in pain, but in a stable condition, according to the medical reports. It's reported that 2 other police were hurt as well. The Interior Ministry says there were over 160,000 people demonstrating all across France, 28,000 of them in Paris. Now, the violence is being blamed on the so-called Black Bloc protesters. There were also yellow vests in the crowd, and of course many ordinary people trying to peacefully demonstrate.
Chaotic scenes in the streets around Montparnasse train station as protesters clashed with police before the march even started. Joining this year's May Day demonstrations, dozens of so-called black blocs. Masked and hooded anarchists bent on wreaking havoc and determined to pick a fight with security forces. The French Interior Ministry said about 28,000 people marched in Paris, while an independent media count put the number at 40,000. This year's event saw both trade unionists and yellow vest protesters take to the streets under high security. Some 7,400 police officers were deployed in the capital, and dozens of arrests had been made by early afternoon. Clashes erupted a few minutes into the march when hardline demonstrators tried to enter a police station, only to be dispersed with copious amounts of tear gas. Elsewhere, a handful of protesters set fire to rubbish bins, while others smashed shop windows along the route. Dozens were injured in the clashes, including at least 1 police officer. Some 200 people were arrested.
Scenes now on the streets of Paris earlier this May Day. May Day, of course, International Workers' Day. There have been events across the world that have shown, a different side of how people mark May the 1st. Here at France 24, Mo Julien with this.
A dozen people were arrested in St. Petersburg for carrying portraits of the Russian president and chanting Putin is a thief. About 2,000 took part in the demonstration against the government.
The system must change. We want the elections in St. Petersburg to be fair. As long as there are no fair elections here, the international community will not respect us.
There were also arrests in Istanbul. The symbolic Taksim Square is cordoned off, so thousands gathered in the district of Bakırköy.
If the country is not managed democratically enough, it's impossible for our economy to be strong.
A month ago, the opposition won local elections in Istanbul, the economic capital, and the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, asked for the vote to be cancelled. International Workers' Day in Gaza served as an opportunity for Palestinians to demand better working conditions. In a territory badly affected by an Israeli blockade, They say no one earns a decent wage.
There isn't a single employee in Gaza or Rafah who's living in good conditions. Workers are exhausted and want dignity. We've had it with lies and humiliation.
In Iraq's capital, there was music in the streets as the Secretary General of the Communist Party called for the job market to be revived.
I would like to take this opportunity to call for job opportunities and the reopening of all closed factories. Today, there is a decline in all industrial activities in the country.
In Seoul, Phnom Penh or Jakarta, thousands of employees demonstrated to demand a raise and better working conditions.
May Day across the world. There have been clashes between demonstrators and troops in Venezuela, a number of soldiers siding with the opposition in the face-off this Tuesday. Over 100 people are reported to have been injured. Venezuela's disputed president, Nicolás Maduro, made a televised speech claiming victory over the coup plotters. Juan Guaidó led the attempt to overthrow Maduro. Guaidó's the self-proclaimed interim president who was recognized by the United States and a list of other countries. He says the movement for change is not over. Well, earlier for analysis, we spoke with Eduardo Rios, a specialist on Venezuela at Sciences Po in Paris.
What Guaidó did was to put in evidence clearly that the government, the Maduro government, has a deficiency within its military flank, and that in so doing, he showed that the military was not the monolith that it once appeared. However, he failed at his bet, and the next step forward is to protect himself against what is foreseeably an attack from Maduro, which will seek to imprison him now. That I think is the next move. How that happens will be fought in the streets and will showcase a confrontation in the streets between Maduro and Guaidó to at least show that they have the backing of the people of Venezuela.
You're seeing basically more civil conflict coming out of this.
Yeah, in a civic way, yes. The tensions are going to increase for a while. However, nothing let's foresee a civil confrontation or an armed civil confrontation. But there is a political confrontation that is going to mount in the next few days. That is, yes, apparent.
Okay, so that's going to happen on the streets. Civil conflict will mount, as you say. Meanwhile, diplomatically, the US and Russia are talking. Now, we understand that Maduro had actually agreed to leave until Russia, through its support once again, or reiterated its support for him. What happens next? Because is this going to be resolved basically by Washington and Moscow?
So we are not in the Cold War, and this is not a Cold War scenario. So what is happening right now is that Venezuela, in a country that was terribly blocked by political confrontation, it now has added an international dimension to it that it did not have before, which is a confrontation between Russia and this is a political problem that is national in essence, but that now has this new dimension. The negotiation between Russia and Washington will not have an effect unless it is followed by political results in the Venezuelan political field, the national political field. So no, this will not be a confrontation between the US and Russia. This is just one extra layer in a very complicated situation.
But you feel this is where the crisis will be resolved? In a room somewhere between the Secretary of State, Pompeo, and Russia's Foreign Minister, Lavrov?
No. I think that it is not right to consider that a negotiation between these two men will solve the Venezuelan crisis. That is ludicrous, or at least a little bit too much wishful thinking.
Now, I was just thinking that, of course, they could maybe persuade Maduro to actually take that exile ticket to Cuba, that kind of thing.
Oh, yes. So he could try to go to Cuba. That is the most, if he was going to go somewhere, Cuba would be the place to go. However, other than Mike Pompeo, who said that Maduro was ready to go to Cuba, nobody else has confirmed that news. And we are in a situation in which things are moving fast. And perhaps he had the idea of going to Cuba, but nothing at the moment suggests that Maduro is out of power or in the very short term.
We continue to keep across all developments in Venezuela for you. And as soon as anything happens, of course, we will let you know. The situation there, as we say, very tense with still the issue, as Eduardo was saying there, the possibility of more violence on the streets. We'll keep across all developments for you. Now, let's change the tone completely and move towards one of the big joys in life. I'm talking football. There's been a massive Champions League game tonight. Second semi-final, of course, Barcelona versus Liverpool. This is basically two clubs that have won the title 5 times apiece each. A huge tradition of winning this title. Many people have seen this as a possible final. But it's the semi-final, it's the first leg, and the news is that Barcelona ran out tonight by winners by 3 goals to nil. It was a sensational match. Goals from Luis Suarez to start with, scoring, of course, against his old club, and then Lionel Messi with 2 goals. The third goal for Barcelona, an absolute stonker, as they say, a free kick from 25 metres, nearly broke the net. A remarkable goal, remarkable game by Liverpool, but they just couldn't score. Barcelona showing how it was done. Let's bring in for analysis about what happens next in this one. David Webber, who is senior lecturer in football studies at the University of Warwick. Dave, I often think you've got one of the best jobs in the world studying football. Absolutely fantastic. You lucky, lucky man. Give us your thoughts on tonight's game.
Well, it's nights like this where I'm not entirely sure where I'm the luckiest man. I'm a Liverpool fan, so...
and I'm an Evertonian. There we go.
Particularly painful one, yeah. I mean, I think the difference is, as you said, just Barcelona were just clinical tonight. There were long spells in that game where Liverpool dominated, and you looked at that side, and Liverpool looked comfortable. They dominated the possession through long spells. But they just simply couldn't make that breakthrough. And I think that was telling in the end. And that could prove decisive next week in Tuesday's return leg. I think had Liverpool got an away goal tonight, even at 3-1, you would have given Liverpool a reasonable chance of turning that around at Anfield. You know, a big European night there under the lights. With the atmosphere, the cop in full voice, I think you would have given Liverpool a big chance. Now they've got a massive...
So Mo Salah is going to regret that... well, it's easy to say it was a sitter because, from the sidelines, everybody's an expert, I know. Yeah. But he was on the pitch, the ball comes to him, it looked easier to score, he hit the post.
Yeah, I think that sort of summed up Salah's night. I think there was a couple of early chances, early forays into the Barcelona half where it was just that final ball. And I think there was about 4 or 5 opportunities where that final ball from Salah to Mane, I'm not sure. I think we missed Firmino tonight. Just as a sort of an extra focal point of that attack, just playing in between those lines. I think maybe Firmino starting from the start next week, that could make a difference. We should see Liverpool score, but I think Salah missed a couple. I mean, Mane as well. He's been in a rich vein of form as well. He missed a couple of chances that you would have expected him to bury. There was a really good chance in the first half. Very fine margins.
You are a Liverpool fan, David. You are a Liverpool fan. I'm from Liverpool, but I'm of the blue persuasion. But I'll say one thing. When you get a night that's important, and you mentioned it, when the cop, Liverpool's major sort of fan base, are in full voice, and Anfield's a very hostile place to go, even the great can crumble. So there is a possibility Liverpool can turn this round. Surely.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been done before. I mean, you kind of think just a couple of years ago, the Dortmund game, and Dortmund scored a couple of times that night, well, a few times that night, and that's a really strong Dortmund side, and Liverpool still prevailed. The difficulty, of course, is going to be stopping Barcelona scoring, which is far easier said than done. So we have to be on the game, defensively. And then, obviously, the goals need to go in at the other end as well. It's a massive game next week now.
Great night to be a Barcelona fan then, David. That's the bottom line then.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the place just took off. As soon as that second goal went in, it was just... People will talk about that and Messi being lucky and having the bounce of the ball, but the intelligence there to read that... Everybody basically stopped. Messi kept playing. Ball ends up in the back of the net. As for that third goal, hit Messi's 600 for... I
was going to say, he got lucky 600 times. That's quite a rate, isn't it?
Incredible goal. And you couldn't have place that ball if you were standing on the line any better than Messi did from, say, 30 or so yards out. Just an incredible free
But
kick.
Liverpool have quality players. You know, if Salah has a good night, if Firmino's brought back, Van Dijk goes up, there's 2 headers at a corner, it's 2 goals. It's possible.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. You know, I mean, you think back 12 months ago.
Liverpool in the final last year, let's remind people.
Well, I mean, I was thinking more, you know, Barcelona take a 4-1 lead against Roma.
Yes.
And the Italians managed to turn that around in the second leg. They kept a clean sheet. They scored 3, and Roma went through to play us. I don't see much of an improvement in that Barcelona team since then. I think that there's considerable hope in that respect. But you know, so it's still all to play for. But like I say, a big task for Liverpool next week.
David, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure speaking to you. David Webber, the senior lecturer in football studies at the University of Warwick and Liverpool fan. Thank you for putting a brave face on what has been a difficult night for the Reds. Thank you very much indeed. Let's remind you of the main world news headlines here live from Paris. France on May Day. More violence on the streets of Paris. Clashes between police and protesters. 300 arrests. Black bloc militants blamed for the violence. Opposition supporters clashing with armed forces in Caracas. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State urges Russia to cease its support of Nicolas Maduro. Julian Assange has been jailed for 50 weeks after jumping bail 7 years ago. The WikiLeaks co-founder supporters have stepped up a campaign to help him avoid extradition to the United States.